Ever wish your AI coding assistant actually knew your team's real context? The docs, the specs, the notes, everything that explains how your systems work? With a Box MCP server, you can securely bring that knowledge right into your development workflow. It connects Box to GitHub Copilot through the MCP Registry, so AI generates granular results using your own trusted content. I'm Andrew, Senior Developer Advocate here at Box. Let's get started. All right, here in Box, we have a folder called To Do API, and has 3 files. This first one being a product requirements doc right over here. So a pretty straightforward PRD. And then on top of that, we also have a design doc for this API. And then finally, we also have an API style guide. Now, these are the kind of documents that pretty much every dev team already has. PRDs, onboarding guides, internal references, and now I can bring them directly into my workflow without ever moving them outside of Box. Switching over to VS Code, I've got a minimal workspace right over here with an existing OpenAPI spec that defines the API. So you have things like endpoints, parameters, responses, all that kind of stuff. Now, in short, this OpenAPI spec gives me the technical truth, what exists in the API and how it behaves. On the other hand, my content in Box provides the organizational truth, naming conventions, error taxonomy, auth patterns, and the rationale behind our design choices. So by combining both, Copilot can generate output that's not just functional, but also aligned with how our team actually works. All right, so now that we have all our assets, we're going to create 2 things. First, a runnable server that implements the endpoints defined in this OpenAPI spec. Second, a production-ready README that explains the API and how to run it. Both are going to be generated by Copilot and also grounded in this OpenAPI spec and the documents I showed you in Box. This is just one example of how you can use a Box MCP server to make AI tools context-aware for code, documentation, onboarding, and even architecture diagrams. Right here in the GitHub MCP Registry, let's first go ahead and install the Box MCP server. We'll search Box, then we'll scroll down and hit Install. It opens up VS Code automatically, so we'll hit Install. We'll hit Allow. And if it asks, we'll sign into another account. We'll go ahead and log in. We'll go ahead and access the box. And we're good. So just to make sure, let's double check these configurations right over here. We'll show configuration in JSON format. And we can see here that this MCP server is running, and we have 19 tools available from the server. So now that we have it installed, this means that Copilot can securely use those Box docs in my coding session with all my existing Box permissions and governance rules still in place. This way, when I ask Copilot for help, it's pulling directly from approved version content in Box. All right, back in VS Code, let's first generate the Flask server. I'm going to use this blank server.py file right over here and ask Copilot to implement the endpoints defined in this OpenAPI spec. You also want to make sure we follow naming conventions, auth patterns, and error taxonomy from the Box docs. So over here in chat, we'll say just that. Use the OpenAPI spec and the document stored in Box to generate a Flask server that implements all defined endpoints and follows our internal conventions. Output this in the blank server.py file. So let's go ahead and run this. And there it is. So down below, you can see that it called a few tools for a Box MCP server down over here. Looks like it listed folder content. Then on top of that, we also got file content for each of the files in that folder. Looks like this one's for the API style guide. And then down below, we also saw a few actions taken, files changed, some instructions for how to run it, a few notes, all that kind of stuff. And of course, on the left side over here, we also see the server that it created over here in server.py. All right, so far so good. What we're going to do now is create some documentation for the server. For those docs, we're going to use this placeholder readme.md file right over here. And then next, we'll ask Copilot Chat, use the OpenAPI spec and the documents stored in Box to generate a production-ready README for this API. Follow the internal structure and conventions from the style guide and output this in the blank README.md file. Let's go ahead and run this. Great, looks like it's done. First thing that it did was review our OpenAPI spec that we have locally in this workspace. And then beyond that, it called a few tools from our Box MCP server, just like the last prompt. So listing folder content, then also, of course, getting file content for each of the files in that folder. So here's our PRD, for example. Then after that, looks like we have a few notes here on how it completed our production-ready README generated from all our content. So we see the actions taken, files changed, notes, all that kind of stuff. And then again, on the left side, we see the README. So here we have an intro, set of requirements, running the server, authentication examples, pretty cool quick start on how to make a few API calls, error handling, security governance, reference, all that kind of stuff. You can see how quickly Copilot puts everything together, saving me hours of manual doc writing and also keeping everything consistent across our team. All right, so just for good measure, let's go ahead and test this out and see if it works. Let's first close up the chat, and then open up the terminal. We'll run the server. And now that it's running, let's jump into Postman and make a few sample API calls. Here in Postman, the first call we're going to make is the create a to-do. So we'll go ahead and send this one with this request body. All right, looks like it works. We got our tool1 created response, as well as the JSON response body down over here. Now let's make a second request, getting all to-dos. This one's just going to be a quick get call to /v1/to-dos. And what we should see in the response is our newly created to-do. So if I hit send, and there it is. We see 200 OK, as well as the response object, which includes our recently created to-do. Everything we just saw was generated instantly because a Box MCP server made my team's content available right inside VS Code, securely and under my existing permissions. Every access is also governed by Box, so things like permissions, retention, and classification policies are all automatically enforced. This way, you can use your enterprise content in your AI tools without ever compromising security or control. So in just a few minutes, we use Copilot to generate both a README and a Flask server, grounded in our OpenAPI spec and real team documentation stored in Box. It gave us some pretty solid boilerplate code that we can continue testing and extending. And the same pattern works for any developer workflow: architecture planning, onboarding materials, infrastructure setup, or internal tools. This is what it means to build smarter and more securely with the Box MCP server and GitHub Copilot. For more information on how to get started, check out our Box MCP server documentation right over here. You'll find tutorials, guides, quick starts, everything you need to get started. I'm Andrew. See you next time.